Hey everyone, Face here. Well, in our last episode, we finally got around to painting our 262, and now that that's done, it's time to really get started on finishing this thing. Now, we are going to apply the decals. Now, before we go too far into this, I am going to say one final word about this. That being my pronunciation of the word decals. I do still get comments every once in a while from people who criticize my pronunciation of the word decal, decal, whatever. You say tomato, I say tomato. All I'm going to say is it's a regional dialect. I'm from Canada. That's the way I say it. That's the way everyone I know says it. Everyone I know in the hobby, everyone I know outside of the hobby. It's just the way I have always been, it's the way I will always be. So hopefully this will curb the comments for a while, though I doubt it because I've gone over this rant before and it hasn't ever worked, but whatever. Every once in a while I just kind of feel the need to say something. So anyway, like I said, in our last episode we painted our camouflage. And but before we can actually apply our decals, because of the way the water slide decals work, they adhere best on a surface with a very high gloss to it. So my preferred type of gloss coat is not actually even a model product at all. It's actually Pledge Future Floor Polish. I don't know who ever came up with the idea of using it, but somewhere in the mists of time, somewhere in the last few decades, somebody discovered that Pledge Future Floor Polish, which goes by many different names all over the internet. I'll try and post a link in the comment bar down below to a website that I once found that has, lots of different international product names for the same product. So, if you're in like the UK or the Netherlands or whatever, you'll be able to find the product or something similar. I don't know who it was that figured it out, but somewhere in the mists of time, somebody figured out that this stuff works like a hot damn for providing a very solid, a very high gloss clear coat. Now, it's great to use right out of the bottle. You don't require any thinner. It's great to use for not just your clear coat, but also for your canopies. What I've done for a lot of my models that have canopies is you pour some of this into a jar, and you dip your canopy into it, and that will increase the clarity. Because the way that Pledge works is it will fill the tiny little nicks and scratches, but it's also self-leveling, so it has a unique ability to essentially perfectly smooth itself out when used in that capacity. But I actually neglected to do that for this particular model. But nevertheless, when spraying it through an airbrush, it's extremely simple to use. As I said, there's no need to thin it. You just pour it straight into your paint cup, run it right through your airbrush, and spray it like that was what it was designed to do. It's extremely simple. And now with that out of the way, well, let's spray our clear coat. So we've got our bottle of Future, and you've got your paint cup, just the same as you would with any other clear coat or paint color or whatever. Just go ahead and pour as much as you think you're going to use into the bottle, or into your paint jar, paint cup, whatever you want to call it. Get out your airbrush. As always, do just a little test to make sure that it's spraying correctly. I've got my normal coverage airbrush needle back into my brush after using the fine tip for the camouflage. And just the same as you would with any other type of airbrushing, you just use your standard perfect pass, as we've done before. So it's been a couple of days since I sprayed my coat of Future, and as you can see, my 262 has a very high glossy finish to it. This is the ideal finish that you want for application of decals, because, as I said before, they adhere the best. They settle down best on a very, very glossy, very smooth surface. So what you're going to need in order to apply your decals is obviously the decal sheet itself, a good hobby knife, preferably with a fresh blade, a bowl of water. Warm is preferable. Doesn't necessarily have to be hot, but just lukewarm. And the longer you take to apply all of your decals, you will have to change out your water at some point, more than likely. And if you happen to have one of these cutting mats, I highly recommend it, because that way you don't have to worry about damaging the surface that you're working on. And finally, it's not essential, but I highly recommend you pick up a bottle of some kind of setting solution. This is called Solvaset. But there's a lot of different types of setting solutions out there. Basically what they do is, once the decal is applied and the bulk of the moisture is removed, you apply a little bit of Solvaset and it will cause the decal to soften and adhere more permanently to the surface of the model. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually are applying them. But it's not overly difficult, it's just time consuming and fantastically boring. I'm pretty sure I've said before how applying decals is about my least favorite part of model building. But, it's an essential step, because, I couldn't just, weather this and call it finished. It wouldn't look right. So, you got to apply your decals. So, let's get to it. So the decal sheet itself is laid out in kind of a random pattern. There's not really any rhyme or reason as to what is set where in terms of number. Obviously each decal corresponds to a number on the instructions, so that you know which to put where. The only real organization there is to it is that obviously, as you can see, is that the smaller markings are near the top, while the larger markings are near the bottom. There's not really any other rhyme or reason as to what goes where. So the best way I've found to apply decals, the best organization I've been able to find, is to basically, pick one view of your aircraft, say the top view here, and just focus on that. Do all the ones in this view, and then once those are done, then move on to the bottom, and then move on to the sides, and then move on to the specific markings for that aircraft. I find that's the easiest way to keep things straight and organized. And like I said, using a pen to scribble off each one as you've done it. So I've decided to start with just one of the crosses goes on the wing, because it's a good size marking. It'll have lots of contrast on the wing as I apply it. So your first step is going to be just to drop it in the water. Let it sit for 10 or 20 seconds, just enough time for, you'll see the backing paper start to curl up a little bit. And once that happens, then you'll have an idea that it's ready to peel off of the backing. Once the decal is moistened and is ready to be removed from the backing, For a surface like this wing, I like to simply, I'll often take a little bit of moisture and kind of drip it into place in case I should need to, well, in case you need a little extra moisture to move the decal around. But essentially, I'll just place the decal paper on the surface and then gently slide the decal off the paper with my finger. No, there you can see it's set in place, but there's still a lot of moisture there. So I like to use a little bit of tissue paper or a clean dry cloth or an old t-shirt or something to blot away the bulk of the moisture until, essentially until it's dry. And then once it's dry, let it sit for a couple of minutes, maybe 90 seconds or so. And then once it's fully set, then you'll want to apply a little bit of your setting solution. So we'll let this sit for a minute and we'll come right back to it. So you take your setting solution. If you have Solvaset, it'll come with a brush applicator. If you're using something like Microsol or Microset, you'll have to use a separate brush of its own. Basically, you just take your brush, not overly wet, but just like slightly moistened, and just apply it to the surface of the decal. Make sure you get as much coverage as you can. And now you're going to want to let it set for quite a while. You're not going to want to touch that decal at all. But you can see there's a little bit of moisture still on the surface of it. Now, the first time I ever used Solvaset on a model, I had a bit of a panic attack because it started to, upon application of the setting solution, the decal started to wrinkle. Don't panic. That is very likely to happen. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens quite a lot, and it will settle down. Essentially, what the solution is doing is reacting with the film, the thin plastic film that the decal is printed on, softening it. And it is bound. When it softens, it expands a little bit. But as it dries and hardens and essentially melts into the surface, the other effect that this has is that it will slightly soften your paint and allow the decal to kind of melt into the surface, so that you have what looks like a much more painted on look than simply, markings applied over top of a coat of paint. And an additional reason to having the clear coat, the gloss clear coat applied prior, is that because the decals themselves have, a glossy sheen to them. I mean, you can see like they're kind of shiny, so that the gloss clear and the glossy decal, they have kind of a uniform gloss to them. So when you go to apply your final flat clear coat, when your model is about finished, it'll be very uniform, and the flat will even it out to a very even flat level. Now I'm not going to bother to show every single decal that I apply. I'm not going to bother with the entire process, but basically that's all there is to it. For a model this simple, and you don't hear those words very often from Tamiya because they're very well known for their models being well engineered and somewhat complicated, but this was a very, very simple and very easy to build model. So I'm really glad that I chose it for this tutorial. But because this is such a very simple model, most of the decals are either very small or are being applied over very flat surfaces. So you're not dealing with complex compound curves or anything like that. if you're getting into anything more complicated than this, then yeah, you're going to want to get some practice. You know, if you have a model that that you started, or like some spare decals from another model, and you have a scrap part, you know, something that has kind of a weird compound curve to it, you know, try it out on that, and see how it works out. You know, don't just jump in with your, you know, with both feet, and expect that it's going to work out perfectly on your first try. You know, do practice it. Do try it out first. That's the best advice I can give you. You know, no one is a master modeler on their first kit. You know, everything takes practice. You should see the stuff that I was building 5 years ago. It was terrible. But anyway, so I'm going to get back to applying my decals. It's probably going to take me about 3 or 4 hours to do all of them. There's not that many, but you got to be careful. I'll probably end up taking a break 2 or 3 times during the process, just to break up the monotony of it. But yeah, when we come back, it should be all finished, and we'll take a look at it from there, and we'll be ready to start weathering. Well, all the markings have been applied. You can see even as far as the swastika on the tail. All the squadron markings, tail codes, etc., etc. Everything is all the warning labels. Everything's been applied. Didn't take me as long as I thought it was going to. There weren't quite as many as I had expected. Ultimately, it took me really about 2 hours, and there's all the trimmings, all the backing paper left over. But even more interestingly is how much is actually left over that wasn't used. For example, on here you'll see there's the instrument panels, which you'll recall that I painted rather than using the decals. Alternate tail numbers and squadron markings, and it has the option for red or black wing walk lines. I chose to go with the black rather than the red, plus a few other odds and ends. Like I was saying before, you know, you've got your 3 different variants within the instructions, so obviously you're not going to end up using every single decal. So that's why you want to, you know, keep track of what you have used, what you haven't used. That's why I do the little check mark on. You can see here on the instruction sheet. You can see all the numbers have been ticked off as to which ones I have and haven't done. Well, I've done them all now. So now that the markings have been applied, you might be thinking, well, it's done now, right? Not exactly. No. The next step is actually a repeat of the last step before applying the markings. We're going to need to hit this with another gloss clear coat, which serves 2 purposes. First and foremost, it seals down the markings so that you know, now that they're permanently a part of the model. Because even though we've applied a little bit of setting solution, it's still possible for the markings to peel up. Like if I were to take a piece of tape and stick it down over a decal and lift it up, the decal might come off. So once you've sprayed your final gloss clear coat, then there's no risk of that anymore. Your model is like sealed. The only way to remove anything would be, you know, through sanding or some sort of paint stripper. Once we're done that, then we'll move on to my favorite step in any model, the weathering process. But that's going to have to wait until the next video, so do stay tuned for that. Should be up in a couple of days. So thank you very much for watching, and happy modeling.